Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I work the night shift at an old radio telescope facility in Fairview. I say work like it's some important job, but really, I'm just a maintenance guy who makes sure things don't fall apart while nobody's looking. The place hasn't done actual research in decades. Now it's just kept running because someone in the government decided it's historically significant, which apparently means they'll pay 3 people to keep the lights on, but not enough to actually do anything useful with it. There's me, Elliot, my supervisor Grant, and a technician named Wyatt. Grant's been here since the 80s and treats the equipment like it's his children. He can tell you the history of every piece of machinery in this place, what it was designed to do when it was last serviced. He talks about the facility's glory days like other people talk about old girlfriends. Wyatt's young, fresh out of technical school, and mostly spends his shifts watching videos on his phone. He took this job because it pays decent and nobody bothers him. I'm somewhere in the middle, 32 years old, and wondering how I ended up babysitting a building full of machines that stopped mattering before I was born. The facility itself is this sprawling complex of buildings centered around a massive radio telescope that points uselessly at the sky. The main structure is all concrete and steel, built in that brutalist style from the 60s where everything looks like a bunker. Inside, it's a maze of corridors painted in faded government colors, that specific shade of green that exists nowhere else in nature. Half the rooms are locked and haven't been opened in years. The other half are full of equipment that ranges from outdated to completely obsolete. The job is exactly as boring as it sounds. I clock in at 11 at night and leave at 7 in the morning. 8 hours of walking through the facility, checking gauges, replacing burnt-out bulbs, making sure nothing's overheating or leaking. I've got a route I follow, the same route every single night. Start in the West Wing, check the environmental controls, move to the equipment rooms, verify all the temperature readings, end up in the main control room, look over the displays that show nothing important. The main telescope hasn't moved in 15 years. There's actually a bird's nest in part of the mechanism. The computers in the control room are so old they still have floppy disk drives. We keep logbooks written by hand because the digital system crashed in 2003 and nobody ever fixed it. Grant insists on maintaining everything according to the original specifications, even though nobody's ever going to use any of it again. It's like we're curators of a museum that nobody visits. Most nights, nothing happens. That's literally the job. Make sure nothing happens. Make sure the heating doesn't fail, the roof doesn't leak, the equipment doesn't catch fire. I've worked here for 4 years, and the most exciting thing that ever happened was when a family of raccoons got into the ventilation system. But 3 weeks ago, something happened. It was around 3 in the morning on a Tuesday. Grant and Wyatt were taking their break in the staff room, probably arguing about sports like they do every night. Grant's a football guy. Wyatt likes basketball, and they can argue about absolutely nothing for an hour straight. I was in the main control room doing my usual walkthrough. not really paying attention because I'd done this same route 1,000 times. The control room is the heart of the facility, or at least it used to be. It's a big space filled with equipment consoles arranged in a semicircle, all facing this huge window that looks out at the telescope. Most of the screens are dark now. A few show static readouts that never change: temperature, humidity, power consumption. Numbers that tick along the same way they have for decades. That's when I noticed the screen. One of the old monitors, the kind that's thick as a brick and weighs about 50 pounds, was on. Not just on, but displaying something. This monitor sat at the far end of the console, in a corner where Grant had piled some old binders and unused keyboards. I'd reported it as dead equipment so many times I'd stopped bothering. It just sat there in the corner, dark and useless. One more piece of junk we kept around for no good reason. But now it was showing something. A cursor. Just a single white cursor, blinking on a black screen. I stopped mid-step and stared at it. The thing is, it didn't look like it had just turned on. You know how electronics are when they power up? There's a flicker, a warming up period, sometimes a startup sound. This screen looked like it had been on forever, like I'd somehow walked past it 100 times tonight and never noticed until now. The cursor blinked steadily, patient, waiting. I should have walked away, should have called Grant, should have done anything except what I actually did. But instead, I moved closer, my footsteps echoing in the quiet room, and that's when I saw there was text on the screen. Simple white letters, in a plain font that reminded me of old computers from the 80s. Are you sure? Below that, 2 options. Yes, no. That was it. No other information. No title bar. No program name. No explanation of what I was supposed to be sure about. Just those 2 choices and a question that could mean anything or nothing. I stood there for probably a full minute, just staring. My heart was beating faster. I felt like I'd walked in on something private, something I wasn't supposed to see. The screen had this quality to it, not like it was displaying information, but like it was looking back at me. Then I did something stupid. I reached out and touched the keyboard. The keys were cold, colder than they should have been, colder than the room. The coldness went through my fingers, up my arm. I pressed a few keys experimentally, random letters, nothing that would select either option. Nothing happened. The screen didn't change. The cursor just kept blinking between yes and no, like it had all the time in the world. I was about to turn and get Grant when I noticed something else. It was quiet. I don't mean normal quiet. The control room is never really silent. There's always the hum of electronics, the building settling, the wind outside rattling the windows. Even the lights make a faint buzzing sound if you pay attention. Background noise you stop noticing after a while. But right then, I couldn't hear anything, not even my own breathing. I put my hand on my chest and felt it rising and falling, but there was no sound to it, no air moving in and out, complete silence, perfect silence, the kind of silence that shouldn't exist. I looked around the room and everything seemed normal. The other screens still showed their static displays. The binders were still piled on the desk. Nothing had changed, except the sound had been turned off on reality itself. The silence lasted maybe 10 seconds, though it felt longer. Then all at once, sound came rushing back. The hum of electronics, the building settling, my own breathing suddenly loud in my ears, and when it did, the screen was dark again. Dead, like it had never been on at all. My hands were shaking. I backed away from the monitor, nearly tripping over a chair. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I stood there for another minute, maybe two, just staring at the dark screen, waiting for it to come back on. It didn't. I practically ran to the staff room. Grant and Wyatt were sitting at the break table, coffee cups in front of them, in the middle of their usual argument. They stopped talking when they saw my face. "Something's wrong with the display in the control room," I said. My voice sounded weird, too high. One of the old monitors just turned on. Grant set down his coffee and frowned. "Which one?" "The dead one. Corner unit. Had some kind of prompt on it." Wyatt snorted. "Those things haven't worked since before I was born, man. You sure you didn't just see a reflection or something?" I touched the keyboard. There was text on the screen. Grant stood up. He might be old and set in his ways, but he takes this place seriously. He's the kind of guy who treats equipment failures like personal insults. "Show me." We all headed back to the control room, our footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. I was walking fast, almost jogging. Part of me wanted them to see it, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. Part of me was terrified they would see it, because that would mean it was real. The monitor was exactly like I'd always known it, dark, lifeless, covered in a thin layer of dust. The cursor was gone. The text was gone. Just a dead screen reflecting the overhead lights. "It was on," I insisted, pointing at it. "Right there." There was text. It said, "Are you sure?" And then two options, yes or no. Grant moved behind the console and checked the connections. He made that clicking sound with his tongue that he does when he's found a problem. "These cables aren't even plugged in, Elliot. Look." He held up the loose cables hanging from the back of the monitor. Power cord, video cable, both disconnected, ends dangling in the air. I stared at them. But I saw it. The screen was on. There was a cursor. "You been getting enough sleep?" Wyatt asked. He wasn't being mean about it, just genuinely concerned. "Night shift messes with your head sometimes. I fell asleep standing up once during my first month here." "I wasn't asleep." Grant plugged the cables back in, connected them properly, and hit the power button on the monitor. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. "Monitor's dead. Probably has been for years. Whatever you saw." He trailed off, but I knew what he wasn't saying. Whatever I saw wasn't real. "Yeah," I finally said. "Yeah, maybe I did doze off for a second. Sorry for freaking out." "Don't worry about it," Grant said, patting my shoulder. "Happens to everybody. Why don't you take an early lunch? Clear your head." I nodded and left. But I didn't go to the break room. I went outside instead, stood in the cold night air, and tried to convince myself they were right. I'd been working too many shifts. I was tired. I dozed off and had some weird half-dream. That was the logical explanation. But I hadn't dozed off. I knew I hadn't. I couldn't stop thinking about that question. "Are you sure?" "Sure about what?" After that night, I couldn't let it go. The question kept running through my mind during every shift. I'd be checking gauges or replacing light bulbs and find myself thinking about it. "Are you sure?" Two simple options for something, I didn't even understand. I started volunteering for extra shifts. Grant was thrilled, said I was finally showing some initiative. He'd been trying to get me to care more about this place for years. The truth was, I needed to know if it would happen again. I spent hours in the control room, always finding excuses to be there, organizing papers, cleaning equipment, anything to stay in that room, near that monitor. 3 nights passed. Nothing happened. On the 4th night, it did. It was just past 2 in the morning. I was alone in the control room. Grant was doing rounds in the East Wing. Wyatt was in the equipment room, running diagnostics on something. I was filing some paperwork, actual paper in actual file folders, because that's how we do things here. Then I felt it. The silence. It didn't happen gradually. 1 second, there was normal background noise. The next second, there was nothing. Like someone had pressed a mute button on the world. I looked up, already knowing what I'd see. The monitor was on. Same black screen, same white cursor, same text. Are you sure? Yes. No. This time, I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, watching. The cursor blinked steadily. The silence pressed in around me like physical pressure, like the air itself was holding still. I tried to take a step back and found I could move. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone. If I could get a picture, I'd have proof. Something to show Grant and Wyatt. I raised the phone, aimed it at the screen. The phone's display was black, not off, black, like something was blocking it. The screen was working. I could feel the phone vibrating as I pressed buttons, but the display showed nothing but solid black. I lowered the phone. The display worked normally again. I could see my home screen, my apps, everything normal. I raised it toward the monitor again. Black screen. The message was clear. Whatever this was, it didn't want to be recorded. The monitor stayed on longer this time, maybe 30 seconds. I watched the cursor blink, counted the seconds in my head, because I couldn't hear my own heartbeat to count that way. When I reached 27, sound came rushing back. The monitor went dark. I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the dead screen. Then I did what I should have done the first time. I checked the cables, still unplugged, still disconnected, still impossible. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times. Always when I was alone, always the same message, and always that terrible silence that came with it, like the universe itself was waiting for an answer. I started noticing something else too. The silence wasn't just happening at the facility. I'd be at home, making breakfast, and everything would just stop. No traffic noise from outside my apartment window. No humming from the refrigerator, no creaking from the old pipes. Total silence for maybe 2 seconds. Then everything would come back. It happened at the grocery store while I was shopping. Middle of the day, lots of people around, and suddenly everything went quiet. I looked around and everyone was still moving, still shopping, talking to each other. But I couldn't hear any of it, just silence. Then it snapped back, and I could hear everything again. Music playing over the speakers, carts rattling, people talking. It happened in my car while I was driving home from work. Radio went silent, mid-song. Engine noise disappeared. I was doing 60 on the highway, and for 2 seconds, there was nothing but silence while my car coasted. Then the sound came back, and each time it happened, I felt like something was waiting. Not watching, waiting. like reality itself was holding its breath, hoping I'd finally understand what it was asking. I stopped sleeping well, would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about that question. Are you sure? Started having dreams about it. That black screen with white text, the cursor blinking between two choices I didn't understand. I started researching the facility's history online, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. Most of what I found was boring technical reports and budget documents. The place was built in 1962 as part of some federal research initiative, operated until 1975, then got mothballed. Nothing weird. Nothing that would explain phantom screens and impossible questions. The official records made it sound like the facility had just completed its useful life. Budget cuts, changing priorities, that kind of thing. But something about the timing felt wrong. Projects don't just shut down at their peak. And according to the reports, 1975 was when the facility had its largest staff and most active research schedule. Then I found something in an old archived newspaper article from 1974. I was deep into a search engine, clicking through page after page of scanned documents from the local library's digital collection. Most of it was useless. City council meetings, school board decisions, obituaries. Then I saw a headline that made me stop scrolling. Federal Radio Telescope Project concludes after breakthrough discovery. It was a small article buried in the local news section of the Fairview Gazette, dated November 1974. The article was frustratingly vague, saying only that scientists at the Fairview facility had successfully completed their research objectives ahead of schedule, and that the project would be transitioning to a preservation phase. There was a quote from someone at the National Science Foundation saying the research had been more successful than anticipated and thanking the community for its support. I read it 3 times looking for details. There weren't any, just vague language about success and completion. What kind of research project shuts down after a breakthrough? Usually, that's when things get more funding, more attention, more research. You don't make a major discovery and then immediately quit. You keep going, build on it, explore the implications. Unless you found something you weren't supposed to find. I kept digging through the archives, found a few more articles about the shutdown, all of them equally vague. Local businesses were sad to lose the scientists who'd been supporting the economy. The mayor gave a speech thanking everyone involved. Nothing about what they'd actually discovered. Then I found a research paper. It was in a database of academic journals, published in 1973 by the facility's original director, a guy named Dr. Lawrence Keller. The paper had a weird title that I had to read twice. Detecting the Baseline Frequency. Methodologies for Identifying Universal Constants. I downloaded it and started reading. I'm not a scientist. I barely passed high school physics. Most of the paper went completely over my head. Equations and graphs and technical terms I didn't understand. But I read it anyway, slowly, looking up words on my phone as I went. The basic idea, as far as I could understand it, was that Dr. Keller's team wasn't using the telescope to listen for signals from space like you'd expect. They were trying to find something else, some kind of underlying frequency that everything in the universe shares. They called it different things in different parts of the paper. The baseline frequency, the fundamental harmonic, the hum of existence. The paper talked about how everything that exists gives off some kind of signature. Atoms vibrate, stars pulse, even empty space has quantum fluctuations. Dr. Keller thought that underneath all of that, there might be one frequency that everything shared, some basic constant that was part of the fabric of reality itself. It was like how every radio station broadcasts on different frequencies, but they all use the same electromagnetic spectrum. Keller was looking for reality's version of that spectrum, the thing that lets everything exist in the first place. The paper got really technical in the middle sections, describing their methods and equipment modifications. I didn't understand most of it, but I got the sense they'd done something unusual to the telescope, changed it somehow, made it into something that could do more than just receive signals. The paper ended abruptly, mid-sentence, in the conclusion section. One paragraph about analyzing their findings, and then it just stopped, like someone had decided to stop publishing before explaining what they'd found. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen of my laptop. It was 4 a.m. I'd been reading for 2 hours. Dr. Keller's research had been about finding the baseline frequency. The newspaper said they'd successfully completed their research objectives. They'd found it. And then they'd shut everything down immediately. Within months, the facility went from having its largest staff ever to being mothballed. Not because they'd failed, because they'd succeeded, because they'd touched something they weren't supposed to touch. I went to work that night with a sick feeling in my stomach that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Around 1 a.m, I was in the control room again. Grant and Wyatt were doing maintenance on the telescope housing itself, which meant I was alone with the screens and the quiet hum of electronics. I sat down in front of the dead monitor, just sat there, staring at it, waiting. The silence came first this time, just dropped over everything like a blanket. Then the monitor turned on, but this time there was more text. System requires confirmation to continue. Below that, no selection detected for 13.8 billion cycles. And then, underneath, are you sure? Yes, no. I read it 3 times, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. 13.8 billion. I knew that number. That's how old the universe is. 13.8 billion years. Cycles. My chest felt tight. I couldn't breathe right, because I understood now. Not completely, but enough to be terrified. The telescope hadn't just found the baseline frequency. It had been modified to interact with it, to touch something fundamental about reality itself. And when you touch something, sometimes it touches back. The universe wasn't asking me specifically. It wasn't asking humans specifically. It was asking anything, everything, if it should keep existing. And it had been asking that question for the entire history of the universe. 13.8 billion years. Every second of every day, since the very beginning, the universe had been asking, should I continue? And for all that time, nothing had ever been aware enough to hear the question. Until now. Until Dr. Keller and his team built a machine that could reach down into the baseline frequency and make contact with something that should have stayed untouched. And now that something had finally noticed the question, now that something had acknowledged it existed. The universe needed an answer to continue. I backed away from the screen, my chair rolling backward until it hit the wall. "No," I said out loud. My voice sounded strange in the silence, flat and dead. "No, this isn't real. This can't be real." The text changed. Waiting for input. New text appeared below that. Default action in 60 seconds. "What does that mean?" I shouted at the screen. "What's the default? What happens if I don't choose?" No answer. The text just sat there. The countdown started appearing. 59 seconds. 58 seconds. I looked at my watch. The second hand had stopped moving. Not broken, just stopped. Frozen between the 3 and the 4. I ran to the window that looked out at the telescope. Grant and Wyatt were out there, visible in the floodlights. Grant had his toolbox open, was reaching for something. Wyatt was pointing at part of the telescope housing, his mouth open mid-word. They weren't moving. They weren't frozen like statues. It was more like someone had pressed pause on a video. Grant's hand was suspended in mid-reach. Wyatt's hair was caught in a breeze that had stopped blowing. I turned back to the screen. 45 seconds. I was the only thing still experiencing time, the only thing the universe was waiting for. "This isn't fair," I said. My voice was shaking. "Why me? I'm nobody. I'm just a maintenance guy. I don't know what to choose." The screen didn't care about fairness. 40 seconds. I tried to leave the control room, made it 3 steps toward the door before I found myself back in front of the screen. I tried again, same thing. It wasn't like hitting a wall. I could move around the room fine. But every time I tried to leave, space folded back on itself and put me right back where I started. I was trapped in this moment, in this choice. 35 seconds. A new line of text appeared. "This interface will not appear again." I stared at those words, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. This was it. This was the only time in the entire history of the universe that anything would get to answer. Every star that had ever burned, every planet that had ever formed, every life that had ever existed, it all led to right now, to this room, to me somehow, being the one who had to decide. 30 seconds. "Decide what?" I yelled at the screen. "I don't even know what I'm choosing. What does yes mean? What does no mean?" The screen just showed the countdown. 25 seconds. I thought about pressing yes, confirming that reality should continue. But what was I confirming? Continue how? Continue to what end? What if yes meant agreeing to something terrible? What if the universe was supposed to end and I'd be forcing everyone to keep existing in something that should have stopped billions of years ago? What if the universe was asking because something was wrong, because something had gone off course and needed confirmation to keep limping along? 20 seconds. But no could mean stopping everything. Everyone. My parents in Ohio, my sister and her kids, Grant and Wyatt frozen outside, every person in Fairview sleeping in their beds right now, every person everywhere, all 7 billion of them gone in an instant. How could I choose that? How could anyone choose that? 15 seconds. I looked down at my hands. They seemed less real somehow, thinner, like I could see through them if I looked hard enough. Not translucent, just less solid. Like everything was starting to fade because reality itself was starting to collapse while it waited for permission to exist. My whole body felt like that. Less real, less there. 10 seconds. I put my hands on the keyboard. My fingers shook so badly I could barely control them. I positioned them over the keys, one finger on Y, one on N. What if yes was wrong? What if no was mercy? What if there was no right answer and I was going to doom everyone either way? 5 seconds. I thought about Dr. Keller and his team. They'd seen this screen too. I was sure of it now. That's why they shut everything down so fast. That's why they buried their research and scattered to the winds. Maybe they'd chosen. And we've all been living with their decision ever since. Or maybe they'd run away. Maybe they'd left the question unanswered, and it had been waiting all this time for someone else to stumble onto it. 3 seconds. I pressed a key. I won't tell you which one. I can't. Not because I don't want you to know, but because the second I chose, I stopped being able to remember which key my finger was on. Like the universe took that information away from me, made it impossible for me to ever be certain. I remember the feeling of pressing down, the slight resistance of the key, the click as it bottomed out. But I don't remember if it was Y or N. The screen went dark immediately. The silence shattered, and sound came flooding back so suddenly and so loudly that I fell to my knees, hands over my ears. The hum of electronics, the wind outside, my own ragged breathing, my heart pounding. It all came back at once like a physical force. I looked at my watch. The second hand was moving again, sweeping smoothly past the 4, the 5, the 6. Through the window, I could see Grant and Wyatt moving normally. Grant pulled a wrench from his toolbox. Wyatt lowered his arm. They kept working like nothing had happened, like time had never stopped for them. Because it hadn't. Only for me. Everything was exactly like it had been. I stayed on my knees for a long time, shaking. I couldn't stand up, couldn't catch my breath. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the console to hold them still. Grant came in maybe 10 minutes later, stomping his boots to knock off the mud. "Hey, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I was still on the floor. I tried to stand up, managed it on the second try. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out rough. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired. You should go home early. Get some rest. Wyatt and I can handle the rest of the shift." I nodded. Didn't trust myself to say anything else. I drove home through the empty streets as the sun started to rise. Everything looked normal. People were already out. Joggers on the sidewalk, someone walking their dog, a delivery truck making early rounds. The world was turning like it always did, but I kept thinking about what I'd done, the choice I'd made. And the worst part, the part that makes it impossible to sleep, impossible to stop thinking about, is that I'll never know if I chose right. Maybe tomorrow will come, and the day after that, and the day after that. Maybe everything will keep going forever, exactly like it has been. Or maybe somewhere in the fundamental code of reality, there's a countdown ticking, waiting to reach 0, waiting to end everything because I made the wrong choice. Or maybe I made the right choice, and the countdown is to when the question gets asked again, to something else, somewhere else. I don't know. I'll never know. That was 3 weeks ago. I still work at the facility, still do my rounds, check the equipment, file the paperwork. Grant and Wyatt don't notice anything different about me. To them, I'm the same Elliot. I've always been. But I'm not. I notice things now, things other people don't see. Every so often, it happens maybe 5 or 6 times a day. There's a moment where everything goes completely silent, just for a fraction of a second. So brief that most people probably don't even register it. It's like the world takes a tiny breath, pauses, then continues. But I notice every single time. And in that silence, in that tiny pause, I swear I can feel it. The universe checking in, making sure, holding its breath. Not asking the question again, not yet, just waiting, confirming that the answer I gave is still valid, that reality is still cleared to continue. Sometimes I go back to the control room and stand in front of that monitor. I wait for it to turn on again, to show me the question one more time. Part of me wants to see it again, to get another chance, to know for sure what I chose, to maybe choose differently. But it stays dark. The cables are still unplugged. The screen is still just a useless piece of old equipment, gathering dust in a corner. But I know what I saw. I know what I did. And every time that silence comes, every time the world holds its breath for that split second, I wonder if this is it. If this is the moment when reality checks in again, when the question comes back, when the universe asks someone else, or when it decides my answer wasn't good enough after all. I tell myself that I made the right choice, that everything's fine, that the world kept turning, so obviously I did what I was supposed to do. But late at night, when I can't sleep, I think about those two options. Yes and no. Such simple words for such an impossible choice. And I think about Dr. Keller and his team back in 1974, running from this place like it was on fire, shutting down the project as fast as they could, scattering the research, never speaking about what they'd found. Maybe they saw what I saw. Maybe they answered the question too. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me awake most nights, maybe they chose differently than I did. Maybe the universe we're living in now isn't the original one. Maybe it's the second version, or the third, or the 100th. Maybe every time someone chooses wrong, reality resets. The universe ends and starts over, asking the question again, waiting for the right answer. And we'd never know. Every time it happens, everything starts fresh. New Big Bang, new everything. And the universe keeps asking, keeps waiting, keeps hoping that eventually something will choose correctly. Except maybe in some old radio telescope facility where a machine accidentally touched something it shouldn't have, where the question got asked in a way that left evidence behind. I don't know why I'm writing this down. Maybe because I need someone else to know what happened. Maybe because if it happens to you, if you're working somewhere late at night and you see a screen turn on that shouldn't be able to, if you see a question asking if you're sure about something you don't understand, maybe you'll know what you're looking at. Maybe you'll make a different choice than I did. Maybe you'll make the right one. Or maybe I'm just losing my mind. Maybe the night shift really did get to me. This whole thing is just my brain breaking down from too many hours in the dark. But I don't think so. Because the silence keeps coming. Every day. Multiple times a day. These little pauses in reality that nobody else seems to notice. And every time it happens, every time the world goes perfectly, completely quiet for that fraction of a second, I feel it. The universe. Checking, waiting, asking a question it asked me once and might ask again. Are you sure? I don't know if I'm sure. I don't know if anyone could ever be sure about something like that. But I made my choice. And now we're all living with it. Every single one of us. Whether you know it or not. The silence just happened again while I was typing this. Did you feel it? Probably not. Most people don't. But it happened. It always happens. And one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe 1,000 years from now, the silence is going to last longer than a fraction of a second. One day, the universe is going to stop checking in and start asking the question again. And when it does, I hope whoever answers it makes a better choice than I did. I hope they know something I didn't. I hope they're sure, because I never was.